Hello, welcome to a lighting tutorial. This is going to be pretty basic, and I'm also going to start from this asset pack I'm using, this free asset pack, so people can follow along. Um, so the first thing is, let's actually stop this from looking like this. So what happened was these assets were made with older versions of Unity, and before the universal render pipeline presumably was released. So because of that, these materials have the standard shader. To fix this, it's actually pretty easy. All you need to do is find all of your pink materials. That's usually means they're bugged out. And we're just gonna look for lit here and look for lit universal render pipeline. And that should fix it. Well, at least that part. This one is using this default material here. I'm actually just gonna create a new material for it. And I'm gonna assign it to these guys. So one thing for these materials is they don't have their texture designated. You see there's no base map, so they're just kind of not doing much. So what we need to do is head over to texture, assign it as the base map for the second slot material, and then click main slot and do the same thing and assign the base map. Okay, so now our seed is actually textured. It's a pretty basic asset pack, but that's kind of the point, I guess. So let's just to close these doors and stuff, you just need to click on them and set the rotations to 0. And then I also want to get rid of these objects. I think these are jars and stuff, but we're not using them, so we're going to remove them. Okay, that's it for our initial setup. Now we're actually going to prepare the room for lighting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create, and this is optional, but I like to do this to keep things organized. I'm going to move all of my furniture under this furniture block. These technically are furniture, so I'm also going to move them there. And I'm going to delete this directional light. And then now you want to open your lighting tab. So here's how you do that. Window, rendering, lighting. And we can just dock it over here. Or if you want, you can even keep it over here, but this kind of makes things a little hard to work with. So I prefer to have it next to my inspector tab. You'll notice once we remove our directional light, we get this weird kind of like lighting in the back. That's fine. So now we're going to create new lighting settings, which is going to create a lighting setting object, probably wherever you happen to be. You can move that really wherever you want, but this is fine for now. So what I want to do now is actually prepare this room for lighting. So I think I'm going to delete this floor, and I'm going to add several cubes here to function as our walls. This is going to be indoor scene, so I'm going to put walls around it. I think indoor scenes are probably a little easier to light because it's much easier to control where the lighting's coming from. And I find the environmental lighting tends to be a little less predictable. Just because it's coming from the skybox. So actually, while I'm talking about that, go over to environment under your lighting tab and set the intensity multiplier to 0. Now that's going to remove the contribution from our environment. When it comes to lighting, the mantra less is more, I think, is very relevant insofar as you really want to make the lighting is very complex, and you really want to do your best to remove as many variables as you can, especially if you're just beginning. Because when you have contribution from multiple lighting sources, it can just be very hard to kind of know what's exactly contributing what. And you can do a lot with a few lights. Okay, so I'm just putting these into place. Probably make this a little bigger. Quick tip for Blender, if you're rotating something and you hold control while you're rotating, it'll actually lock it into 15-degree increments, which is great for getting that those 90-degree angles, which are very common. And of course, the shortcuts in Blender, W is for movement, E is for rotation, and R is for scaling. So that's how you can quickly get this kind of stuff done. This kind of stuff done. All right, almost finished here. Boom, we don't want any light to escape, and we also want to minimize the outside influence here. It's better to, if you notice there's a gap, it's better to just go overboard, I find. Okay. Almost done here. Yeah, the floor is like peeking out. So let's move it up and let's scale this up a bit. Okay. That's pretty good. And you can always adjust this whenever you need to. Okay. So there's two main types of lighting in Blender. One is real-time lighting, and the other is bake lighting. Real-time lighting has a benefit in that it's very easy to work with in prototype. For example, here I can move this light around and see its effect on the stage. But it has one big drawback in that you're not going to get as high of a resolution as you would be able to do with bake lighting. So what bake lighting is we used, here if you go to scene, we use Unity's Light Baker to kind of bake light into objects, into their texture maps. It's called the light map. And it's kind of like just another image that gets drawn on top of the object that kind of reflects how the lighting looks on it. I think with real-time lighting, you get kind of like a dynamic light map. But again, you can get higher resolution stuff with baked light maps. So that's what I want to cover. However, if you find that the real-time lights are good enough for your purposes, it's perfectly fine to use that, of course. It's really just a different tool for a different job. Real quick, if we go to lighting, we can see it's got several settings. This is a point light, so it kind of just represents kind of like a bulb floating in space or something like that. We can mess with its intensity range. I like a low intensity with high range, I think. Gives some cool effects. The material you actually are using for a lot of objects in your scene has a huge effect on how it reacts to light. So here, this second slot and main slot are the ones that are being used. You'll notice when I turn the smoothness down, it completely changes the way the light acts. You can see the metallic map too. I prefer keeping both of these pretty low. I find that with the smoothness, even if it's like in a dark place, you still have like this kind of weird like sheen over it. And I feel like I get less control over my lighting, whereas when I turn these both low, I can see that now they're properly getting dark when I move away. Okay, so let's actually look at what bake lighting looks like and what it entails. Okay, so first step for bake lighting is we have to set things to static. Static means it doesn't change. So when you change it to, and that makes sense because when you bake it, you're kind of baking it from the perspective or wherever that light happens to be at that time. And if you move the light, you'll notice that it's not going to change anything after it's been baked. I'll show you what that means. So set this to baked. And then I can just shift select all of these and set it to static. Alternatively, if they're all under a common parent, you can just set static on the parent and choose to change the children as well. And finally, let's set some base settings here. These default settings are good, but they're going to take way too long for us to bake, and you can actually get something fairly decent with much lower settings. So I'm going to set something like 16 for this, 64 for this, and 32 for this. Generally, you want to use powers of 2 because a lot of different algorithms work better with powers of 2. I like to turn ambient occlusion on. And probably the last thing is maybe turn this up to 60 And the other defaults are generally okay. I find the filtering is fine with auto, and light map packing is okay with auto. So, okay, let's just double check. Our light is baked, set to bake mode, and our furniture is static. Um, you can enable real-time global illumination. Okay, let's generate. So you'll notice as it's generating, you can actually click this bar here and it'll open up another tab and you can see an estimate of how long it takes. I'm working with a NVIDIA GeForce 1080, so it's a pretty middle of the line, kind of dated card, of course, but it was a pretty good card back in its day, but nothing too crazy, so you should be able to get comparable results. You'll see some stuff blink and turn pink and stuff like that. Okay, let's take a look. So this is our bake scene. Um, and one interesting thing is you'll notice on all our static objects, we now have a bake light map in the mesh render component, and we can actually see if we click on it. Essentially, what this tells us is for that object, what is being used to light it and how it looks. Each of these small circles represents like a part of the resolution of the light map. I think this is a 2048 by 2048 light map. So you can see here, this is actually a light map UV. Now keep in mind these are different from your object UVs. And if you don't have a light map UV created for your mesh, I believe it will look at the first UV of your object. If you don't know what any of this means, either don't have to worry about it, or if it is messed up, then you do have to worry about it because it means something is wrong with your model. So I'll cover it really briefly. You can see here this object has 2 UV maps in Blender and other 3D authoring software. It's probably going to be in some different place. This initial UV map, this is for the actual material and texture that it uses to color in the faces. And this is the light map UV. So the light map UV, you can do a lot of weird things with the normal UV map, but for the light map UV, generally you want to have like good coverage, make sure things are spaced out, and each of the faces has is decently well presented in the light map UV. If you don't have this light map UV, that's normally going to be second in the list. Unity is capable of generating it, but like I said, I think it uses the base UV map as a default to build that off of. So if you're getting weird lighting in Blender, first thing to do is look at that light map UV in your mesh. Second thing is with this particular asset pack, I had some really weird results for these objects the first time I baked it. I don't know why I can't reproduce it, but I don't seem to be getting it anymore. But I think restarting Unity and rebaking it helped. So one really useful thing is everything in the bake light map is scaled to 1. So if something is like if you see you're getting like a lot of blotchy stuff here, this is a result of not enough rays being kind of thrown on the object. There's 2 ways to fix that. You can either increase the amount of samples here. Alternatively, you can head over to the scale in the light map and kind of crank this up to something like 10, which means it's going to be more represented in the light map. This area is going to be 10 times bigger. So let's see what that looks like. While that's baking, I will say one more thing in that scale matters when you bake your light maps. In fact, if you have things which are physically bigger in Unity, they're gonna require proportionally more rays in order to be accurately lit. So you actually want to work with a realistic scale when you're importing into Unity. So you can run into trouble if like you're in Blender or Maya or whatever, and you don't properly scale your objects when you import them, because they're gonna look wacky when they're being lit. Because if you have something that's 100 times as big, like this object, you can see proportionally it's going to take more rays for them to be properly lit. Okay, so yeah, we can see there's looks like a pretty subtle difference. If we look at the light map, oh wow, yeah, that's taking up a lot of space, probably to the detriment of everything else in the scene. Again, this is just one thing you can try when you're debugging stuff. I'm gonna put it back to 1. I think in this case, it's probably just a result of these being low. One thing I like to do is I like to up the amount of max bounces. This kind of makes the lighting. This is the amount of times the ray will bounce in your scene before kind of like deciding what the final color of the pixel is. So it kind of makes, especially for a closed area, it's going to make the light more like diffuse over the area. But one cool thing I want to cover is emissive lighting. Emissive lighting is really powerful, and it's another way of lighting your scene. So I'm going to show how to do that real quick and show how cool it can be. So I'm actually going to set this point light inactive. And I'm going to set up some emissive lighting. So emissive lighting is cool because it essentially lets you make like a custom shape for your light. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm gonna put this here, like copy it, rotate it, put that there. And then I'm also going to create 2 more cubes. And I'm going to kind of make some fluorescent-ish lighting up here. Yeah, I think that's kind of like a fluorescent light. Let's move those closer to the center. Okay. So in order to get the emissive stuff to work, it's pretty simple, actually. I noticed I was kind of running into there. All we have to do is create a material for every emissive we want to do. So I'm going to create a material. I'm going to call this emissive. Is that how you spell emissive? I think I've got an extra M there. Okay. Emissive red and emissive yellow. So when I go into the inspector, all I need to do is check in emissive and then change this color to whatever color I want that emission to be. So this one's red and this one's going to be I think like a very pale yellow. We can also, the cool thing about emissive maps is we can also make them brighter or dimmer by changing this intensity parameter. So I'm going to make the fluorescence really dim. So I'm going to change that to -2. And then simply just drag the emissive map or the emissive material to your cubes. And okay, it's weird how that one is like so thin. Let me fix that. Okay. And let us, I think you have to set these also to static if you wanted to bake, if you wanted to interact with static objects. Hello, this is Arted from the future, back after 10 minutes of light debugging. So 2 things. Under emission in the material properties, make sure that that global illumination dropdown is set to baked. And I noticed that my walls had the default lit material assigned. I hadn't assigned the walls material to them. So make sure to do that because the default lit material, I believe, has smoothness set to 0.5 or metallic. And just to show you how much of a difference that makes, look at this. 0.5, we're getting like this phantom lighting coming from nowhere that I mentioned earlier. And 0 is the only one that lets it actually be lit the way you'd expect it to. So, okay, accounting for that, I can change it back to red. I'll just change it to blue to actually test some stuff. And I also had these turned off, so now I'm actually gonna bake with these and see how it looks like. So make sure you have your own material with zero metallic and zero smoothness set to the walls. And make sure your emissive maps are set to bake for global illumination. Uh, Doing the lighting is a very finicky process, so just be prepared to really be ready to mess with this thing. Okay, this is pretty interesting. I'm not in love with it. I think this kind of pea color yellow isn't great. So I'm going to lower the brightness by 1 and just set it to white. Again, this kind of just goes along with simpler is better. And if you're not sure, try going with less lighting. And then you kind of want to build it up from nothing rather than try to mess with multiple lights at once. So start with one light, then begin to add more, and then see how that kind of affects the scene. Okay. This is kind of a cool effect. And this is kind of like almost like a power save mode kitchen or something, with the dimmers like kind of half on. But I like it because you can see the way these emissive things kind of add like a lot of character here. Even with like some really simple meshes, you can really kind of do some interesting stuff. Like, for example, what if we just this is it becomes much more an art than anything, and then it really depends with what feel you're trying to go for your room. Like, what if we just put one in the corner here and turned it way down? Let's see what this looks like. So in the end, you just have to experiment a bit, and it's going to take a while before finding something that really fits the feel or atmosphere you're going for, or whatever that may be. You don't want one easy thing is for one light to kind of dominate the other lights, and that kind of becomes boring. This is kind of interesting. We've got this one light in the corner, and then the ambient occlusion, I think, is what's creating these kind of dim corners. So yeah, I think this looks pretty realistic. You can hide one trick. You can hide a lot of bad details in your meshes in dark rooms. So that's kind of like a life hack. Whereas a really brightly lit scene will reveal a lot of those nasty geometry things you might not want people to see. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. If we want, we can also go super bright just to see what it'll look like. I think it's probably going to look pretty washed out, pretty regular, and you're definitely not going to be able to see much contribution from this emissive map over here. Lighting in Unity is like a whole art in and of itself, and it's impossible to... Okay, that actually looks quite interesting. This kind of looks like a laboratory setting. You can actually see some of the contribution from the emissives here. Oh, this is kind of neat. But yeah, lighting in Unity, it's a whole industry almost, a whole art in and of itself, and it's impossible to cover everything with one video. So I'm planning on making follow-ups showing like different types of lights and cookies. And I know I can predict a lot of people are going to run into trouble, so feel free to comment. If you've run into something else, feel free to comment other people's comments. Please be patient. This is a very finicky thing and lots of stuff can go wrong, but I've tried my best to kind of start from the ground up. I'm going to include links for everything in the video description. It's really just this free package that I used and Blender. Everything's free. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Have a good day or night or whatever. Thanks.